Well, let's get it started on this fine Wednesday afternoon. Still talking about European art, early 20th century, and there were a lot of things going on, as we have discussed, and some of the things I have yet to show you. And I talked about Cubism as being kind of the big break from the rest of traditional art. And it had many offshoots. One of them is this, and it's still kind of considered an offshoot of Cubism. And here is an example. Bottom line, Cubism could show you multiple viewpoints of a single object. That was one of the things they did. They could show you the side and the front or the back or whatever. And futurists kind of picked up on that idea, and they wanted to use some of that logic anyway, to portray movement. And this one's kind of an iconic futurist painting, Dynamism of a Dog on a Leash, 1912, Giacomo Balla. And you can see what's happening here. This almost looks like a time-lapsed photograph, in that you see the swinging of the leash, the woman, the feet, the wiener dog, feet, the tail, the head moving around. And they had kind of an overall idea that the art of this new century, this new 20th century, should be dynamic. And so many of the titles, you'll see some form of this: dynamism, dynamic, etc. And so that's really what this was trying to portray movement, dynamism, if you will, on a surface that was by its nature static. Umberto Boccioni, unique forms of continuity in space. And this is a little hard to see, but it is really kind of the same idea. And this is a sort of a figure, not an anatomically correct figure, but a futuristic kind of figure. And you can see all of the movement there of those legs as this person is walking or in motion. And so you can see this is, if you hold this still, it would look like probably a character out of Star Wars or something, but that's futurism. And Gino Severini. And so this is what we've seen so far. It's probably one of the most cubistic pieces that we've seen. And you can see the soldiers, the rifles, and this, as it says here, an armored train. And it's got a cannon, and it was painted during the First World War. And you can see the landscape, the trees, the lights, all of this stuff is fragmented. That's a cubist inspired way to portray this subject matter. And you see it's kind of, in a lot of ways, it's kind of quaint. If you know anything about military history, to have an armored train back in 1915, that may have seemed to be something pretty exotic and powerful and awe-inspiring. But you don't, armored trains, that's not a thing anymore. Why is that? Well, you'll know how to fight back against it because it has to use the railroad tracks. And so it's like not an effective weapon in that sense. Now you can see where trains have been used to deploy troops or to bring big cannon into a battle or bringing in tanks and stuff, but to use it like a weapon in this way, it's just not practical. But at any rate, what we're looking at here is that style of the new century, Cubism. And so one of the things I have to add here too, the futurists were really kind of political too, bottom line. And they were for progress at any cost, in so many words. Benito Mussolini, the guy who invented fascism, the first fascist dictator in the Western world, adopted futurism as the official art of his regime, of the Italian government. And what he liked was this idea of dynamism, of progress, of the new era of machines, and the idea of fascism, at least one aspect of it, is that it controls all aspects of life in the country where fascists rule. So one of the things that people would say about Mussolini during his time was that he made the trains run on time. He was really organized, and see, Hitler adopted a lot of these same methods of governing. And if you have that much control, you know, there is this opportunity to have a dark side. And certainly in Italy and later in Germany, the fascists, Hitler, he built roads and great buildings and stuff. He got everybody, he had full employment, got everybody a job, and the economy was great and all this stuff. On the other hand, there was a dark side where he eliminated, either jailed or killed all of his political enemies, and he did even worse with the Holocaust, where he put everybody that he deemed to be an enemy of the state, killed them in concentration camps. And so anyway, but that was the selling point. That was the idea. Fascism, make everything work. You got all of this stuff going on, all of these new things in this new century. You need a strong-willed, strong-armed leader. And I got to say, we still see some of that emerge around the globe in this day and age. And that is really the attraction of what we would call neo-fascists, was that they want somebody to just control everything and make life better. Of course, I don't want to get too far down that road. But at any rate, and another thing that emerged back in the day was this, ADAH. the art of the absurd, Dada. And it kind of evolved. I just showed you a painting from the First World War. First World War generated a lot of artistic responses from artists around the world. And to be sure, Cubism played a part in that. But the First World War was almost like the end of the world at the time. They called it the Great War. They didn't know there was going to be a Second World War and all of this other stuff. But First World War, a lot of artists were making art about how the whole world was going crazy. It was absurd. And they started making absurd art for an absurd world. Now, today, we probably wouldn't look at it as being so absurd, but they had Dada theater. A lot of this developed in Switzerland, which was a neutral country where a lot of artists fled in the First World War. So you had artists from France, Germany, Austria, Italy, so on. They were right there. And they had this club, it's called the Cafe Voltaire, and it was a place they'd hang out, and they developed Dada everything. They had Dada theater, where the characters in the play would dress up in nonsensical costumes, and they would have lines that were absurd. They would say, they would have nonsense phrases that they would throw around. They had Dada music, which defied all of the conventions of Western music. They would just make noise, for example. And they challenged some of the visual arts this way. And this is one of those Dada artists. His name was Hans Arp. He was from Germany, but when he came to Switzerland, he changed his name to Jean, which is the French version of the same name, John. And he did that because he was very repulsed by what Germany was doing in this First World War. And so he didn't want to have anything to do with his home country, changed his name, and became a Dada artist. Collage arranged according to the laws of chance, torn and pasted paper. So how did he make this? This was exactly in the title. He had a piece of gray, rectangular gray paper. He had white paper. He had black paper, and he tore the white and the black paper up into pieces, rectangular pieces, irregular rectangular pieces, and he threw them up in the air, and where they landed on this sheet of gray paper, he pasted them down, torn and pasted paper. And that's how he created this artwork. Squares arranged according to the laws of chance. And so this was part of that Dada, the absurd. And if you would talk to a traditional artist of the day and the traditional thinking of the era, making a work like this was just, as I said, absurd. And it was known like that, known as the absurd art. And it was that way for a long time. And I gotta say that over time, those ideas of the Dada artist kind of found their way into the mainstream. And so you see this squares arranged according to the laws of chance. We actually make it comes out in all kinds of ways. There was Dada poetry, where you would pick random words and stick them together. In this way, they would write the words on pieces of paper and then put it together. Seemed kind of odd. But we have games like that now. You got these games with these little magnets with the words on them, and you throw them out there. The idea of the laws of chance was something that the Dada artists were really kind of interested in. And that is a connection to what will follow this, which is surrealism. But I got a few other things to show you first. Marcel Duchamp, one of the great Dada artists, and he was really kind of an artist and a performance artist to some extent. He did things like he took this urinal out of a dumpster, out of the trash heap, may have gone to the city dump, I don't know. But at any rate, he got this urinal and he put this signature in it, R. Mutt. And as I say, he was a performance artist because he would take on all of these pseudonyms in his artwork. And one of them was R. Mutt, 1917. And he submitted this as a sculpture. It's a sculpture show in New York, by the way. And he titled it Fountain. They said, Marcel, are you crazy? What are you trying to do? The original was thrown away, actually. That's why it says replica right here. The original, they just threw it away. And not funny, Marcel. Boom. Bottom line is that he had an idea. And that is that you could, as an artist, make anything art. How does that translate into the 21st century? You got a lot of people the last 50, 60 years doing found objects as art. So that's another idea that kind of worked its way into the mainstream. And you want to see Duchamp's work, Philadelphia Museum, and I'm waiting for this because it's got to happen. The mayors of Kansas City and Philadelphia. What's Philadelphia and Kansas City got in common? The Super Bowl and their museums, the Nelson in Kansas City and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, made a bet. Whoever won the Super Bowl would get to show the others' artwork in their museum. And Philadelphia has the biggest, best collection of Marcel Duchamp's work. So this was not just a one-off. And in fact, a lot of critics and historians talk about this work as perhaps being one of the most important works of sculpture in the 20th century. Not because it was crafted so well, like a Michelangelo, but it represented an idea that an artist, if he or she got an object and displayed it as art, it was art. And that idea persists through time, and so much so that these Dada pieces, I remember in graduate school, we had a guest lecturer, and I even forgot her name, forgot where she was from. She was an authority on contemporary art. And her contention was this, that the 20th century was the century of Dada, because all of this Dada and Dada-esque work influence so much of what happens in the 20th century, the century of Dada. And whether you like it or not, artists still have to deal with the fact that these artists like Arp, Duchamp, and others, they changed the game. They changed the rules, and this persisted. I got another, this is a postcard, paper color reproduction of Mona Lisa. And this again is at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Taking Mona Lisa and with a pen, it says pencil here. I thought it was a pen, but anyway. Drew the mustache and a beard. Little goatee on Mona Lisa. Well, what was he saying with that work? Well, a lot of people have written a lot of papers and books on this particular piece. And one kind of common thing is that this is exactly the embodiment of what Dada artists were doing. They were drawing graffiti on the past. They were making fun of it. They were changing the game. They were, as you might guess here, irreverent, excuse me. And these initials on the bottom, for the sake of decorum, I won't tell you what that stands for, but it is something vulgar, and we'll leave it at that. The bride stripped bare by her bachelors, even the large glass. And this is something that took them 8 years to finish. And this is really kind of an analogy, and it has some wire foil dust, varnish. It's got some of this that is drawings, and some of this is foil. And it's like a bunch of objects, and it's put inside a window with glass on either side. This has a lot of significance too. And it's talking about the bride stripped bare by her bachelors, and down here are the bachelors. The bride is up here, and this is all symbolism, and it's all symbolism that was created by Duchamp himself. And he had this thing here. You'll see this in a lot of Duchamp's work. It is a chocolate grinder. And just like you can grind your own coffee, get whole bean, you grind it. Back in this day, you could get whole bean cacao and grind your own beans and make your own chocolate. And so a chocolate grinder. So what is that significant? Why is that significant? Well, Sigmund Freud. We got a lot of things changing, not just in art, but in the whole way that humanity looks at itself. And Freud was a pioneer. He was pretty much the inventor, if you will, of psychology. And he wrote, researched, published extensively about the human condition. And one of the theses of Freud was that machines, the machines we have, are based on somehow human sexuality. Whoa, really? Well, he found the chocolate grinder as being a sexual metaphor, but we actually still kind of talk about a lot of things with this kind of sexual gender identity, like your wall socket here. Female, you put the plug in, it's the male end of this electrical connection. We still use that language, and Freud said, you know, this is a kind of a subliminal thing that subconsciously we're all preoccupied with sex, and it guides how we do everything, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, that's really kind of the theme of this piece. And these are the bachelors, and these are all, they have symbols associated with them that you'd have to be over 100 years old to kind of understand. But like one of them would be a firefighter, a policeman, a butcher, etc. And up here is the bride, and they can't reach the bride, but the bride is sending her signals out with this thing here. And I had no idea personally what that thing was for a long time till I went to College Art Association convention one year, and somebody did extensive research on this particular piece and explain what these things are. Spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you what they are. Antenna. In the early days of radio, we didn't have the tower kind of antennas. And in fact, antennas, both for sending and receiving radio signals, were really squares of a steel wire mesh. And so it looked like a big screen blown up. And that's what this is. And this particular researcher showed us some radio antenna of this type that was placed on the Eiffel Tower in the early 20th century, because this was early radio technology. And again, talking about sexuality and all of that, she is sending her signals that she's looking for a guy or a husband. You know, it's old. But at any rate, bottom line, this was Dada. And after the war, you see this is 1919, 1920, Germany was defeated. A lot of German artists picked up on the idea of Dada. And it remained very political. In fact, it turned way towards politics. Cut with the kitchen knife, Dada, through the last Weimar beer belly cultural epic of Germany. Well, that's a mouthful. But what this was about Germany after the war, and it has all of these images, and they, you know, as I was saying about putting words together for Dada poetry, this is almost like a bunch of images that kind of are random. You see an elephant with a circus performer. I want to zoom in on this. This is like really cool. Circus performer, I showed you headless photos. You know, that was kind of a thing. This is a car, and a lot of this stuff I don't even know what it is. This is ball bearings. Some of these figures are actually contemporary German politicians and thinkers and writers. And you see that she repeatedly put the word Dada in all of this. And again, it was the art of the absurd with, in a lot of ways, an absurd title, and it was about the absurdity that she witnessed post-war Germany. And you could say that it was not in a kind way. It was just a big circus. Everything was, the whole governmental, societal structures had all been fallen apart. There were a lot of greedy people still making a lot of money off the war, and there was a lot of misery and so on. Anyway, Kurt Schwitters, same idea. And we're going to take this back to this, the idea of taking random, in this case, he took torn pieces of paper. Schwitters just would take random pieces of whatever he could find and paste them together. And so you get things like postage stamps and order forms and parts of letters and wallpaper and just anything. But in a lot of ways, Schwitters is looked at as somebody that kind of opened up a lot of doors, a lot of ideas for abstract design. And so all of this stuff here in its own way is kind of meaningless. It doesn't represent that much, but it is very interesting and a very intricate abstract design. And so Kazimir Malevich, this was somebody wrote about this. I forgot who it was. I forgot my list. Somebody wrote that this was one of them that they didn't understand, that this was kind of, didn't have any idea. And I understand that. Malevich was a guy, an artist. What we have in Russia at the time, before and during the First World War, before the Bolshevik Revolution, we had a very thriving art scene. They had a lot of artists that knew what was going on in Paris, visited Paris frequently, and understood what all of this avant-garde was about. And they became leaders in modern art themselves until the Bolsheviks took over, and they kind of decided that all of this modernism was too bourgeois. It was not in keeping with the Marxist revolution. And some of these artists fled, some of them stopped working, and others were killed. But this is kind of in the middle. It's kind of about the dynamism, airplane flying, and he's put together these pieces that kind of, if they don't literally depict an airplane flying, it has some of the, quote, dynamism of an airplane flying. And what you have to know here is that airplanes flying back in 1915 was a whole different kind of thing than saying airplanes flying today, because almost all the planes were small and they were bi-wing. That means they had two wings and they were slow. But to the observer in 1915, this was more that brave new world that they were so excited about. All of the things that 30 years, 20 years before this, heavier than air flight was science fiction. And so anyway, Malevich talked about his work, and he talked about suprematism, and that's kind of what this is in terms of a style. And there were a number of suprematist artists, and basically what they wanted to do was reduce things down to their simplest forms. Lyubov Popilova woman artists. And that was another thing about the Russians. They had pretty much an equal balance of women and men participating in modern art. And again, this doesn't really depict anything like person, place, or thing. Architectonic painting, the idea being that, you have all of these abstract, somewhat geometric shapes, flat color, and it represents the work, the spirit of the work, of the subject, the dynamism. Namgabo, column 1923. This is actually a metal glass. This wood is on the bottom, and this perspex is a kind of plastic that's here. And again, very abstract sculpture, and in its own way celebrates a lot of the new materials that are being invented at the turn of the century. Again, you would go 15, 20 years before 1923, plastic. What's that? This was a new thing. And so anyway, it was about a celebration and put together a sculpture, much like you would put together a building. Does it really point to a particular person, place, or thing? And out of all of this, what develops is that the painting itself is the object. The sculpture itself is the object, and it doesn't have to point to something else to have meaning. That's a big change, because for thousands of years, every painting, every sculpture, every artwork was of something. A painting of the Last Supper, a painting of the crucifixion, a painting of King Louis XIV, a painting of the Stonebreakers, of the Starry Night, etc. We're doing away with that. Now that's really what's happening here. This won't get articulated, spelled out until the 1940s. A guy named Clement Greenberg, a great American art critic, put it this way. He said, for thousands of years, painters have been controlled by others: the church, the state, the wealthy, the powerful. And through that time, painters were haunted by the ghosts, and they were stooges of literature, that every painting had to have a reference to something that was written or spoken. Literature, language, a thing, point to something else. In that, the paintings themselves, in some ways, lost some of their autonomy. And they were doing things that were non-referential. Thank you. Thank you. You bet. Non-referential, didn't refer to anything else except itself. They were not quite there yet, because he still calls this a column, architectonic painting, airplane flying, but they're getting really close to this idea of total abstraction. And this is another Dada artist, fit for active service, got a corpse, rotting flesh, doctors, KV. Ready for service, put them in the army, just say. And all of these generals, they're kind of overweight and they're smoking having a good time, and getting people killed by the millions. And so anyway, George grows, and he stays on it too. He not so much a Dada artist as he's just a political artist. And in this case, you got these people, lackeys around the table, and we got the general in charge, and he's got this lackey whispering in his ear, skull, death, headless people. Why not headless? They're not here because of their ideas or their brains. And that kind of leads to this. So all of this dark political stuff that's going on in Germany kind of ends up as this dark psychological drama night, Max Beckmann. And this is in Dusseldorf. This is still in Germany. Max Beckmann and Otto Dix. It's like George Gross and all of this dark expressionistic painting. And which gets me to the definition of expressionism. And this stuff here is called German expressionism. Bottom line, expressionism. It's where the artist distorts line, shape, form, and color to express emotional content or to elicit an emotional response from the viewer. And so you take a look at this, and this is a torture chamber. This person's tied up by the wrist. People, this is just gruesome. By the way, Max Beckmann, you know where one of the best Max Beckmann collections is? Right here in St. Louis. I showed you Duchamp and Philadelphia had a lot of his work. We got a lot of Max Beckmann works here at the St. Louis Art Museum, and partly because Beckmann had befriended the people, the May family, even though it wouldn't mean anything, it's been so long ago. There used to be department stores here in St. Louis, huge department stores called Famous Bar. And that was kind of like a Macy's or Saks or Kohl's or something, but back in the day, and that was a St. Louis chain. And it existed mostly in St. Louis, but they were like St. Louis royalty. They had a lot of money, and they brought Max Beckmann over here, and he taught painting at Washington University. They got him out of Germany because surely Hitler and those guys would have killed him for all of this degenerate art. But bottom line, expressionism, form, line, shape, color, distorted for its emotional effect. And likewise with Otto Dix, and this is the war, and it's all about this, the dead, the dying, the death, the gruesomeness of that war. And this war, First World War, had a lasting, a very deep effect, because up till that time, it was the worst war ever known by these people. And oddly enough, this war broke out after a long, sustained peace in Europe. And they had almost 50 years of peace. And so all of these people were they jumped into it. They were ready for war. They thought they'd seen all of these paintings of heroism and glory, and they get out there and it's just a big death machine. And so anyway, a lot of artists are talking about that Ernst Ballrock War Monument. And here it is. And this ghost hanging from the ceiling, flying over to haunt those left behind. So anyway, a lot of things going on in the teens and the 20s. What emerges out of that? Surrealism. And I want to go to this. This was the painting that I was trying to show you when everything crashed on Monday. And I did tell you a little bit about the advanced physics that this seems to depict. The idea of melting clocks and how time is not fixed or permanent. It's another dimension. And anyway, this whole piece is kind of based around it and the idea of ants. They were starting to talk about this in that film. Ants. It was a kind of industrial activity that seemed to frighten Salvador Dali. And the idea of ants, if you know anything about them, they come in and they just eat up everything. You get like carpenter ants in your house and they'll just eat your whole house. They work together. They're drones in their own way, and they're very destructive. And this is kind of an analog, a symbol for the mechanized industrial world that we're starting to live in. But at any rate, the earliest guy was this guy, he put together Giorgio de Chirico, Song of Love. And you know, I'm talking about all this randomness of things would have kind of a painting of classical marble head, something that looks like it comes out of ancient Greece or Rome. Painting of a used glove, a ball, random things. And he painted these things in somewhat of a Renaissance style. And that is, he uses a lot of the same devices, the same methods that were used by artists and developed by artists for all of those hundreds of years that we've been talking about. Shadows are all correct. He'd often exaggerate the shadows. And they talk about this because he was Italian, lived in Italy, and they have what they call the Mediterranean light, which is a strong, when they have sunny days, the sun is like really strong and creates very, very stark shadows. But at any rate, de Chirico put these random things together. This stuff comes out of his dreams. Max Ernst. 2 children are threatened by a nightingale. And this is a collage. Oil on wood with wood construction, and that's this stuff here. You can see here these children, they're running away. Nightingale. Nightingale should not frighten anyone. But this is coming out of a nightmare. And I suppose this is the nightingale here. You can zoom in on that. Right there, and there's the 2 children. They're running away. There's a mother and child. They're running away too. And so these ideas of making art from the stuff of your dreams. And this fits the bill as well. Those 3, it's called Dreamscape surrealism. Dali, Magritte, Max Ernst, DeChirico. These are all dreamscape artists. And so we've been talking a little bit about that subconsciousness, the universal subconscious. These are ideas that are percolating up from academia, from the leading thinkers of the age. And so that's part of it. Another part of it is, we talked about photography. By this time, this is almost 1930 right here. And in fact, Dali was from 31. By this time, photography has developed to a point we still don't really have much in the way of color photography, because they're starting to experiment with that. But we have photography well developed, even to the point where we have motion pictures. And by 1927-ish, we have motion pictures with sound. And so all of these things that artists would do when they were the stooges and ghosts of literature, as they say, they were being kind of out of a job. What is your place? What's your reason for being? What can you do that a camera can't do? Answer's right there. Get the images from your mind. A photo can't take pictures of what you dream. And then we have on this other front, as I was talking about psychology, we're starting to do this Freudian dream analysis kind of thinking going on too. And we have Carl Jung, who's talking about the universal subconsciousness and how we access that while we're sleeping. This is a thread that's been running through art. Francisco Goya, the sleep of reason produces monsters. We see Gustave Courbet, show me an angel, and I will paint it. Well, he had actually had the key to this whole question. An angel is something that exists in your mind. It's a construct. It's an idea. It's an idea that changes over time. Angels from the 5th century are very different than angels in the 14th, and so on. And then you got this guy, Rene Magritte, another very popular surrealist. And he actually goes to the point of asking some of these questions in his own work. It says, the treachery of images. Who knows French? Oh yeah, what's it say?
This is not a pipe.
This is not a pipe. Why isn't it a pipe? Because it's a painting of a pipe. And the idea of things are what they are. A painting is a painting. This actually takes that idea to another place. But how easily we are fooled by images, or how treacherous it is to believe images. And so he did all kinds of things. You know, it's the false miracle. Sky, the eye. He takes these ideas. The idea of being in the eye of the beholder, if you will. And I've been talking about a lot of random things here. Hannah Hope taking images of the Weimar Republic and pasting them in with a bunch of stuff of Dada. John Arp, random squares arranged to the laws of chance, random Kurt Schwitter's pieces of paper put together as a design, random objects brought in by Marcel Duchamp. And I showed you Fountain. He had a whole series of ready-mades, and that's what he called them. And the urinal is probably the most famous of all of them, but he would take things like a snow shovel, put it on, hang it on the wall, and that would be his art. So anyway, surrealism. This is called a surrealist object, Merritt Oppenheim. It's fur-covered cup. Oh, I really need your help, Sophie. Le déjeuner, the meal of fur, or something like that. Yeah. Fur-covered cup. She's taken two very disparate things, a cup, a spoon, and a saucer, and covered them in fur and negated the function of the object. And it's random, and in a lot of ways, it's a thing that's kind of disgusting to think if you'd have to put some tea into this or something. But bottom line, that randomness of just pulling random things and putting them together. She had a number of what we term surrealist objects. Some of them didn't last very long, but she took a skinned, not skinned, feathered, headless chicken, just like you'd buy at Schnucks or something, and then put a pair of high heels on, one on either side, and wrapped it up with rope. Another one of these surrealist objects, take things that exist and put them together in a random manner. And that was a surrealist thing. And the idea, underlying idea, was that in some universe and in some ways, this probably makes sense. Maybe it doesn't, but randomness is an issue. We'll start to talk about things like quantum physics, and the idea of randomness. It's actually started to permeate science as well, advanced physics. We see randomness be a method. And what you don't see here with all of this, a lot of the leading surrealists were literary artists, poets, and novelists. And there was one that was kind of wrote the whole manifesto of surrealism. His guy name was Andre Breton. And he basically wrote in a random sort of manner that was kind of analogous to how these artists were putting together their artwork. And I showed you this one before, the automatic drawing. That's random. This is another way of getting to that randomness, standing in front of a canvas and just doing automatic drawing, that let your arms, let your eye just do anything you like, and then come back in and color in the shapes you've created. Automatic surrealism, trying to access that universal subconsciousness through automatism. Clear your mind of conscious thought. Certainly, Oppenheim was likely doing that, putting these two totally random, different things together as one object. And Paul Klee, they kind of put him in here. But he's kind of more of a humorist sort of guy, but the twittering machine. Long before computers, no one is in Twitter like we know it today, but twittering machine, and it is kind of nonsensical contraption that you see it has a crank on it, and these birds would bob up and down and make noise. Of course, it's fictitious, it's just funny, but and that was what was going on in Europe. I got this here. This is kind of this is the big event. So it started with Mussolini and fascism and futurism, 1937. Fascism growing in influence. This is Hitler and his henchmen. Let's see if I can get some of this. Has here George Gross. He's one of the artists that we saw with that the war stuff. Bottom line, Hitler, when they came to power, they actually tried to rid their society of all of this kind of stuff we've been looking at. Surrealism, ADAH, Cubism, post-impressionism, impressionism, all of that. And they collected a lot of this, and they had this thing here called the Exhibition of Degenerate Art. And so there he is visiting this, and I thought I had some. Actually used to have a photo of a ticket to this exhibit, but bottom line is they almost made everybody go see this, and it was basically the denunciation of modernism. This is all degenerate. And of course, they always applied other kinds of hate speech into it, saying that this was the work of the Jews, the gays, all of the people they didn't like were responsible, the communists, etc. And so anyway, and I have this probably should be in the next chapter, but there was a guy painting in the United States, Wilfredo Lam, and it's kind of cubist, it's kind of random, it's kind of surreal. And another thing that was going on is this composition with red, blue, and yellow. Piet Mondrian, as I was saying just a little few minutes ago about how the painting itself was, the idea was self-contained, it was its own object, did not refer to anything else but itself. It's got it really cracked it open right here. Piet Mondrian, and I think I'm gonna leave on that what happens here, Hitler drives a lot of the artists out of Germany, and by 1940 he attacks the rest of Europe, and a lot of those people that we saw came to New York in the 1939-1940 period. They had to get out of there because as much as he didn't like their art, he liked them even less as people, and probably would have had them killed. But there are a couple of notable exceptions. I have to say this because this is remarkable. Pablo Picasso stayed in Paris through the Second World War. They didn't like him. They didn't like his artwork, but He was too well known on the international stage that they couldn't touch him. Anything that they did to him would have sparked even more outrage against the German occupation. And so, yeah, he stayed, he stuck it out. Surrealists mostly ended up in the US and a lot of these other guys. Like I showed you, Max Beckman came over here and taught painting at WashU. And so that is what I wanted to show you. And I wanted to launch this. Some of you already told me that you took a look at this. I opened it up this afternoon. And gotta make sure I got the right share. We do. Quiz 4. What I want you to do is put together a PDF, a docx, and answer these 3 things about each one of these paintings. Period, artist, period, movement, style. And I got that as slashes because some of it is a period, some of it is a style. Post-impressionism. That's not really a style, that's a period. Where a lot of different artists, we're doing a lot of different things and we just kind of lump them together. But if you want to know what the period would look like, oh, I don't have it here, sorry. Make sure I still got the same share, good. And so I want you to find these. These are not in the book. Number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. And I know some of this is from, last week and stuff, but bottom line, identify who did it and what the period style is. Secondly, what are the characteristics of the artwork that link the artwork to the artist? And I want to see if you can articulate that. And bottom line is that those are the same articulating the words that's going to drive your idea on where to search for this. And you can use the internet, you can use anything you like, but there's some things about these that will guide where you look. And so there are 5 paintings here. And they are all people we've looked at. And write that down. It's just, 5 entries, artist, style, why. It's basically, well, why do you think this belongs to this artist? And the other part of it is, if you got the wrong artist, got the right movement, style, or period, and you identify the characteristics, you could probably, for some of these, make a case that it's somebody else. And that would raise this from a totally wrong answer to just, I get it. And there are some of these artists that do similar things, say, like, for instance, Picasso and Braque. They were doing analytic cubism, those brown cubist paintings, side by side for a number of years. And it takes an art historian to kind of pick out which is which. But these are all pretty distinctive. And tell me why you think what it is. And like I say, you can use the internet. You can do any research you like. And it's due at the end of the day, April 2nd, on Sunday night, I'll leave it open for Monday morning, but bottom line, I'd like to be able to talk about this when we come back on Monday. So, any questions about this quiz? And I'm hoping you guys will just knock this out of the park. I think a lot of you will. So. Nobody at home? Nobody here has a question? Well, I have one last request. Have a good weekend. And I'll see you on Monday.
Have a good weekend.
You too. You go. Sophie, what shirt you got?
Rolling Stones.
Rolling Stone, yes. Okay, this made my day. Thank you. You too, Lucy.